Hello, Papia. Hello, Papia. Hello, Papia. Papia, please unmute yourself. Actually, we can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. No, you are not audible.
Can you hear me, Purva?
Yes, yes. Now we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, should I get started?
Yeah, please.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So, it was, as I said, it was a very interesting area of research topics, starting from nanoparticles to child development to food nutrition. And I'll try to give examples from some of the topics that you have been working on or will be working on. Now, the reason I call it qualitative inquiry and not really qualitative methods is because, especially when in social sciences, there's a lot of debate about the use of qualitative methods, qualitative techniques. Now, it was thought earlier that qualitative method is the easiest thing to do. You just go observe some phenomena, come back, and kind of write what your observation has been on. But it is not just a story writing or observation writing. There's a lot of scientific inquiry that goes into the qualitative method, and that adds rigor to it, that makes it more authentic. And if you kind of weigh it, there is nothing like the qualitative method is not better or inferior to the quantitative method. So the way I have outlined my presentation is that I will talk a little bit about what are the criteria that goes into choosing the right method, the research method. In research we say there is no right or wrong method. You have to be very judicious, you have to choose your method very rationally, and that what provide the authenticity or rigor to the method, and of course that validates the research findings. So, having talked a little bit about the criteria for choosing the research method, I have kind of categorized my talk today into various parts. First, I will talk about the various study designs that are available in the qualitative method. Whenever we talk about a research method, there are actually three parts to it. First, how do we design our research? What are we looking for? It is like any other thing that you want to do. You need to have a plan. It's like a trip you want to make. If you want to go to Timbuktu, you just can't start walking, right? You have to know what is the modes of transportation that will take you there in the best possible way, and will not hamper your productivity. So I will talk first about the study design. Then, of course, as I said, there are three parts to any method. First, how do you collect your data? Data is a set of information that is the most important ingredient for any research. What information you will be using and how you will gather that information. Then, secondly, after you have gathered all the necessary information that is required for your research or for your study, you go to analyze it. Okay. Then the second step comes, which we call as data analysis. And of course, after we have analyzed the data, here comes the most challenging part, which is interpretation of the data, because that is what ultimately goes in your research output. What are the main findings, what are the main outcome, and based on this interpretation we do publications, we write monographs. So interpretation of data is equally important. So, if you look into these three steps of data collection, data analysis, and interpretation of data, even in qualitative method, it is done in a very scientific way. It's just not that you do whatever you want to do. There is a rationale behind it. There is certain reasons why we do what we do, and then also how we do. Okay, so these steps are very scientific in nature, and once we follow these steps in a systematic way, in a scientific way, we cannot say that it is just the numbers that matters. No, in fact, I feel that in qualitative research, what we do is that we go into understand what goes into making of the numbers. For example, if certain places have better nutritional status, you do the BMI, you do the stunting, all these indices, numbers. But when you do a qualitative study, an in depth study, you want to analyze what are the determinants, what are the factors, what actually brought those numbers out, why some places are better than the other. So to me, I do both quantitative and qualitative. Most of my research is based on mixed method approach, where there is kind of an equal weightage is given to quantitative and qualitative. And from a personal experience, based on my previous research, ongoing research, I feel that you have to justify the selection of method very rationally. And once you do that and you choose all these steps in a very systematic, scientific way, then nobody can actually question your findings. They cannot say that, oh, it is a qualitative research. In fact, I believe that doing a qualitative research requires more rigor than doing a quantitative one. Now, having said that, I will move on and start with the first part of my presentation, that what makes us choose certain method or methods, not necessarily that we have to take only one method. We can have more than one method. So what goes into making of this research or choosing of this research methods? I know that Purba has updated me that you have been having this course for a couple of days now, I guess almost a week, and you have had excellent speakers come and talk to you. So some of these things might sound like a bit repetitive, but I feel to better contextualize it, to give you a broader understanding in a holistic view, if I just skip some of these steps, then I would not be doing justice to the topic that we will be talking about. So, the basic criteria that goes into choosing a research method is first and foremost, you have to develop your research problem. That is, what is it? What is the aim of your research? What is it that you want to look into? And this you can do based on the extensive review of literature, finding out what are the gaps in the literature, based on which we try to formulate research questions, right? So once we have formulated research questions, we from the research questions we identify what are the research objectives that we are looking into, or what that we want to study. Okay, so basically the goal, the aim of the research objectives, and based on that we come to the research questions. So first we have the aim of the research, then we have the objectives, and then we have the research questions. So aim is more generic, objectives are more specific, and research questions are to the point, what exactly you want to find out in your research. We cannot do anything and everything in our research, okay? It is not humanly possible. So we have to be very, I mean, it's good to be optimistic, but we have to be rational at the same time. And all these things will decide our research method. As I said, and as I always tell to my students, all our students, that there is no right or wrong method. It is how well do you justify the choice of a specific method for your research question. Now, I give you a very personal example. I generally, a lot of my research, as I said earlier, were based on quantitative analysis, big data sets, census, NFHs, all these data sets. But when I was doing my doctorate at McGill University, and I looked into my research questions, then I sat back and I said, no, if I'm just going to put some numbers to this, I'm not going to do justice to my research aim. So, what I have to do is that I have to do a qualitative study, because that is what was the need of my research question. So, whenever you choose a research method, it has to be guided by your research questions, by your research objectives. And if you do that, that's the best rationale that you can put forward, that why you choose one method over the other, or why you have a multiple of methods. Okay. Now, having said that, whenever we talk about research, we of course talk about sampling. And sampling is not only restricted to quantitative study. That's a very kind of wrong idea you have. It's not that in qualitative study you study anybody that you can get your hands on. No, even when we choose our study participants, our research participants for qualitative study also, we follow a very scientific sampling method. Now, you have already been told about sampling, so I'll not go into the detail of it. As you know, just to refresh your memory, there are two types of sampling. One is the probability sampling, where a sample that has been selected using random selection method, so that each unit in the population has a known chance of being selected. And this probability sampling, there are n number of sampling techniques. I will not go into that, but generally probability sampling is best suited for quantitative methods, because it generates a larger data set. It has to be more representative of the entire population. And when you're dealing with numbers, trust me, it's more difficult, because until and unless your sample size is big enough, you cannot justify that it is kind of representative of the total population. The second type of sampling that we have is a non-probability sample. So, non-probability sample is a sample that has not been selected using a random selection method. So, you don't select them randomly. And it implies that some units in the population are more likely to be selected than the others. And generally, when we do qualitative methods, qualitative techniques, we use non probability sampling method. Now, like probability sampling, there are various types of non probability samples also. I will just quickly go through some of them. First, we have the convenience sampling. So, what is convenience sampling? You choose your sample or your research participant as per your convenience. For example, if you want to do a qualitative study of the impact of COVID 19 on a population, not necessarily that you will be able to sample all those people who have tested positive for COVID 19. That might not be very convenient for you, because now, due to social distancing, restriction of movement of people, various lockdown norms which has become the new normal. So in convenience sampling, perhaps in this case you could choose sample from people either whose acquaintances or relatives have been tested positive, or some frontline workers, because it is as per convenience. And there is nothing wrong with it, because you are doing it with a proper justification. Why convenience sampling? Because given the new normal, given the situations now, it is not possible for any one of us to be roaming around everywhere trying to talk to people. So we might resort to convenience sampling. Then another type of sampling which is very kind of common in qualitative research is snowball sampling. Now, the reason it is called a snowball is because, in countries where you have a lot of, where the climate is very harsh and you have very harsh winters with lots of cold and lots of snow everywhere. And you know how they try to make a snowman, they try to make a snowball. They start with a small amount of snow and they keep on rolling it, and then it becomes bigger and larger in structure. So the snowball, the concept of snowball sampling comes from there, that it rolls like a snowball and becomes big. So here what we do is that we find some key informants whom we call as key informants, and then suppose we have 5 such key informants, we ask them to give each one of them to give 5 more contacts. So those 5 becomes 25. Then each of those 25 contacts that we have, we ask them to give 5 more contacts, so that's how our sample keeps on increasing. So we start with 5 and perhaps we end with 125. But the catch in snowball sampling is that you should know when to stop. For example, if you have a lot of similar contacts or similar nodes, key informants, whatever name you want to give them, and after a point of time, suppose you have 5, then you have 25, and then when you reach to the next level, when it is a 75 or 125, you feel that the type of information that you are getting is same. There's no new information added to it. So at that time, you stop rolling the ball there, and then you start with a fresh node, because you want to get more information, newer information. Otherwise, at that point, it gets saturated. So that is the catch with snowball sampling. The other type of sampling that we very often use in qualitative research is purposive sampling. What is purposive sampling? You have a purpose in mind, and with that, you start with your sampling frame. For example, I do a lot of work on child and maternal health. So one of the criteria that we set for a purposive sampling, that anybody, any women who are either pregnant or has given birth in the 3 years preceding the sample, the survey, are eligible to become a study participant. For example, if you are talking about, about adolescent health, about certain dietary patterns, so you, for you to choose the criteria, you can say that since WHO describes an adolescent into, somebody who is over 10 years and less than 24 years, and it has, various stages, middle, early, late adolescence, so you choose your age group of your population and you say that people who fall within this age group are eligible to be part of the sample. Okay, so you have a purpose in mind. You are talking about uh, you know say for example, child development. So you define who is a child, and then you say anybody who is below this age group or falls in this age bracket are eligible to be a participant in this research. So that is what is purposive sampling. Then of course we do quota sampling also. Quota sampling is a kind of more it's a combination of convenience sampling as well as a kind of on spot sampling. When you go to the shopping malls these days, I'm sure our trips to the shopping malls have been reduced. You get people asking you, giving questionnaire, asking you to fill it up. Or even when we see these polls these days, there's a lot of polls goes on before the election, or if there are certain topics that interest our politicians and the media wants to highlight it, so they do a kind of quota sampling. Okay, and quota sampling is not that we just do it for media reports or for all these things. For example, if you are talking about dietary patterns or food and nutrition, and you want to understand, have a broader understanding, so you could do a quota sampling. People who are belonging to certain socioeconomic background, what is their dietary pattern? People who are belonging to different class category, what could be their kind of dietary pattern? Is it similar? Is it different? So we could do a quota sampling also. Quota sampling is again, it's very easy to kind of get your research participants, because it's kind of a quota. It's not that you are fixated on some of the parameters. So having talked about this type of non-probability sampling, now the question is, why qualitative sampling? What are the assumptions that we take? Now some of the assumptions that we take is that when we are doing qualitative sampling or qualitative research, generally it involves social actors, people. For us, we say that for the social scientists, the entire society is a laboratory, right? So when we talk about social actors, they're not predictable like objects. Okay, so today all of us are social actors. Today you might feel to have something for breakfast, tomorrow you might not even want to have that. So you cannot predict that since today you had it for breakfast, every other day you will want to eat the same food basket for your breakfast. Okay, unlike the objects. In the objects, what we say that if we kind of inject this kind of things, we know that it is going to react in a certain way. It does not change. So social actors have emotions, they have their instincts. So what happens? They are not predictable. Therefore, since they are not predictable, so randomized events are irrelevant to social life. You cannot say that today, since at 9 o'clock, the traffic in College Street was very heavy. So you cannot say that tomorrow, at the same time, it is going to follow the same rule, because tomorrow might be a weekly lockdown that you have. And this is again kind of a very hypothesized example. But the point that I'm trying to make is that randomized events are very irrelevant in social life. And following that, probability sampling is expensive and inefficient, because if you want to have probability sampling, you need to have certain number of samples to make your study authenticate. the results of your study authenticate. So it might be very expensive, and you might not find that many research participants for the time frame that you have, because all of you have a degree to get, you have a specific time limit within which you have to complete your research. Therefore, what happens? Non-probability sampling is the best approach when we are talking about qualitative methods. Now, having talked about the sampling and what goes into choosing our research method, let us talk a little bit about research design. How are we going to design our research? You know? Now, research design depends on sources of data we use. There are two sources of data: primary data, which is collected by the researcher, where the researcher actually goes into the field and collects the data. And then we have secondary data, where already an existing data source is used. Now, when we are doing qualitative research, again, it is a misconception that always the data has to be primary data. No, you can do qualitative research even on secondary data. I'm going to talk towards the latter part of my lecture today about the different types of qualitative methods that are available and that people engage. So, what could be the secondary data source? People work on movies, they do qualitative study. So, you're not going to make the movie is already there. When we do content analysis, we talk about newspaper articles, advertisements, book reviews. All these things are already out there. And these days, another very important secondary source of data is the digital data. And a lot of studies are being conducted, qualitative studies are being conducted using digital data, data that is there on your Facebook, Twitter, how many likes and dislikes, or those emojis you get for your post. All these are data, trust me, and people are doing wonderful research. And especially when you talk about your food and nutrition value, these days most of the time people go out, when they go out to eat, even before they eat, they make sure that they have clicked a picture of the food item and they have posted into their Facebook, or even updated their WhatsApp DP, and keep on checking that how many people have commented, liked, or and people generally don't dislike, right? They are courteous enough to at least put a like, and if not, they just view it, right? We want to see. So it's more kind of for the others rather than us kind of consuming the food that we are eating. Okay, and all these things are actually data, and this type of data can be used for qualitative methods. So the idea that qualitative research method only depends on primary data is nullified. You can also do a qualitative analysis of secondary data. Some of our students, we also ask them to do, analyze various websites. Like, since my specialization is on health, so we ask them to kind of analyze various websites that are there for the health purposes, which kind of talks about medicines, net meds, and all these things. So there is a plethora of secondary data that is available, which can be used for qualitative purposes, just not primary data. So don't be fixated. Don't think that, oh, I'm not going to do a field survey. So how is qualitative research important to me? Hold on. You know, doesn't matter whether you are using a primary data set or a secondary data set. You can do qualitative research on both types of this data. And I'm going to talk in today's lecture about how each of these data can be used by various qualitative techniques. Now, when you are actually doing a secondary data set. It is already there, so all you have to do is that you have to kind of fix a criteria and choose the data. But when we are using primary data, then always we have to do a survey. Now, when I talk again about survey, the thing that comes to your mind is that no, surveys we do in quantitative research. No, today I'm going to talk about qualitative surveys. Surveys are also done in qualitative research. Now, when we talk about surveys, there are two types of surveys that we do. One is the questionnaire, the other one is the interview. Now, in a questionnaire, what happens is basically the researcher designs a set of questions, okay? And then the participants or the researcher kind of uh, the research participants are expected to answer those questions for the researcher to kind of do a type of analysis of the information that they have collected. So when we are doing qualitative questionnaire surveys, it could either be a mail survey. Mail survey means that you just post the questionnaire in the address of the people, and you already pay for the postage, and you tell them that once you fill it, all you have to do is kind of just post it. Okay. Now, census in various countries, including Canada, uh, they also do a mail survey, unlike here, where they come and actually fill up the questionnaire. So, mail survey is that you post it by snail mail to your research participants, and then you ask them to send it back to you, and the postage is generally paid, because when they're participating in your research, they are actually doing you a favor. They are not going to gain anything. So if you ask them that pay a postage and send it back, perhaps you are never going to get it back. Then you have group administered questionnaire. Now, what is a group administered questionnaire? Many times, you have a group of research participants. For example, if you want to understand about the nutritional status or certain development indicators, you have a group of people whom you think are your study or research participants, and you give them a questionnaire to fill it up. And if they have any clarification, any queries, they ask you and you clarify it. Now, group administered questionnaire is different from a focus group discussion. Focus group discussion, I'm going to come to it later. But what happens in a group administered questionnaire is that the researcher does not write the answers, and every individual fills up a separate questionnaire. But in group discussion, what happens? The researcher initiates the discussion, and all their data that or whatever the discussion is, they lead the discussion. Whatever the information they collect, all these notes are taken by the researcher. They might either do a video recording, an audio recording, or just a pen and paper note. But in group administered questionnaire, the researcher does not fill it up. It is the research participants who fill up the questionnaire. The role of the researcher is just to facilitate them to clarify any doubts if they have. Otherwise, they will not kind of fill up the questions for them. Then we have household drop off questionnaire. Household drop off is that you go from house to house, you drop off a questionnaire, and you tell them that I'll come back in certain after certain days to pick it up. Okay. And they might have it ready for you, they might not have it ready for you, depending on your luck and how judiciously you have chosen the household where you wanted to drop off the questionnaire. Then these days we have a lot of online service like Google Docs going around, Survey Monkey everywhere. All this are online service. So you just send it in their WhatsApp or in their email account. It gets filled up and it is kind of digitally saved and sent to you. And for online service also, you can start and you can end. You can say that after certain date, no more responses will be accepted. So if you're floating an online survey, and I think in the COVID era, online survey has become the most important kind of form of method to collect information, because as I said, the new normal restricts us from going to the visit to the field site, social distancing, and of course we have to be safe, we have to do research, but that does not mean that we have to put our life at stake. So online service is another form of questioning. Now, coming to the interview, even interviews can be of different types. And in what is the difference between an interview and a conversation? Interview is just not to, it's not a conversation. It's a meaningful conversation. When you conduct interview, you actually have a set of interview schedule or questions, whatever you want to call them, and you want specific information. It is just not a small talk that you do with your friends or relatives. So interview is a conversation with a purpose. So it could be a personal interview where we have one-to-one interview, and which we think is kind of the norm again for qualitative research. But no, that's one type of the interview that you can take. Then you can take interviews over telephone. These days we are doing it a lot, because I have one of my ongoing projects, a couple of them, and we're not able to go back to the field and visit as frequently as we used to, and I can't even ask my RA to do the same. So we have been following up with the interviews over phone. We call them and we ask them when is a good time to talk, and then of course they kind of tell us that you can call us at this time, and we follow the interview over a phone. Then web chat, many times you do web chat, and that's also a type of interview. You can ask your informants, key informants, to give you a time slot, and you can fix a meeting through Google Meet, Zoom, or whatever platform suits you, or just Google Chat, or chat in a WhatsApp also, and you can say that these are the questions that I would like to get my answers to. And web chat has also become a very interesting type of interview technique, which we are following. Now, having talked about the type of surveys and the samples, the question is, how do we select now which method we have to use? We know we have the background, we know whom to talk to, how to talk to, but again, which, given these circumstances, which method is going to be more useful for us? Now, when we are selecting the research method, there are certain conditions that we have to consider, but unfortunately, most of the time we don't consider them. So here I'm going to list out some of the important criteria that will allow us to choose a research method. And if we follow this criteria in choosing a research method, trust me, then it will be very easy for you to justify the selection of your method, and you can, nobody can defy you saying that why you did this method and not the other, because it's kind of a checklist, 1 2 3 4 5, these are the things I have checked, and based on this is the most suitable method for my research. Now, when we are talking about research method, there are certain issues that we have to take into account, especially when we are doing qualitative research. The first and foremost is population issues. We are dealing with people. We have to understand that the research population, or the participants that we are talking about, can they be enumerated? Can we count and say that, that these are the people who are going to be my research populace? For example, if you are trying to understand the you know conditions of homeless people, juvenile delinquent, where do you find them? How do you enumerate them? Slum dwellers, they might be here today, they might be someplace other. So in that case, how do you choose which type of method to of interview to do? Perhaps in this case, the best would be in person interview. You go And whenever you find them, or you know where to find them, you talk to them. Their phone numbers might change, they might not have recharge options. So when you are having a population which is difficult to be enumerated, the best thing would be a personal interview. Then, is the population literate? If the population is not literate, if the population do not have access to online or internet, you cannot expect to do an online survey. You cannot do an online survey in rural areas of illiterate women. No, you cannot do that, because they will not be able to fill it up, right? So in that case, you cannot choose an online survey or a web chat as your research method. Then, are the language issues? Not necessary that you will be doing your field work, or your research participants are from the same linguistic background as yours. Because if you have language issues, and you kind of do your kind of frame your questionnaire in one language, and that language is not understood by the people, and it happens many times, especially when we do research in rural areas, or among illiterate people, the dialect may be different. So if you have a questionnaire written in proper English or Bengali or Hindi, they might not be able to make sense of it. So, in that case, the best would be a personal interview. Then, fourthly, will the population cooperate with you? There are so many times, every time you see that there are this Google Docs coming, or people want you to fill an online survey. Will they cooperate? Do you need to send them reminders? How to work out the ropes. So this population issues, and also what are the geographic restrictions. I've heard students saying, I have 200 sample signs from all over India. It is totally undoable. How can you just, in your limited span of time, given time, when you have to not only collect data, you have to analyze it, write your thesis, send papers for publication, how can you go around the whole of India and just talk to 200 people or collect data from 200 people? So no, we have to understand the geographic restrictions also. And in case, if you are actually considering people who are not within the in the same geographic space that you live in, then perhaps you have to resort to telephone interview, or to a web chat or online interview, depending again on the population whom you are talking to. So, having talked about the population issues, we have to talk about sampling issues. Then, what data is available? What information is available? And can respondents be found? For example, if you want to understand the you know the dietary habits, or the nutritional value, whatever, of a certain type of people, say for example COVID-19 positive people, can the respondents be found? Will people be willing to talk about it? Because COVID, more than a medical symptom, it has become there's a lot of social stigma to it. People don't want to say that they're COVID positive. So, can the respondents be found? And most importantly, who is the respondent? If somebody you are talking to, perhaps that person does not fill up your criteria. For example, if you're doing on education, some people talk about second language acquisition, school education. If you're talking about education, you want to talk to the students or the teachers. If your question is meant for the students, and if your teacher is responding, then it becomes very difficult. And it happens with us also many times when we go to this field. I'll give you some personal example. Given the social structure that we have, many times when we want to talk to the pregnant ladies, it is not them who answer, it is actually their mother-in-law who answers, because the mother-in-law feels that the daughter-in-law doesn't know anything. So she is kind of a superior figure in the household, and she wants to be the respondent. So you have to identify who is your respondent. the mother-in-law or the daughter-in-law? In this case, is it the COVID-19 patient, or anybody who has some idea about COVID-19? Then also, can all members of the population be sampled? This is a major challenge in qualitative research, and that's why we have convenience sampling, we have snowball sampling, whom to sample. Then if you are not doing this properly, the next roadblock that comes is that are response rates likely to be a problem? Because if you are not able to come up with the proper sampling structure, the people from whom you are going to choose your study population, then what is happening, you might not be able to get as much information as you wanted to. Now the next issue that we talk about is the question issue, and this is very important. You will have method books talking about open-ended question, close-ended question, lengthy question, short question, everything. But thing as a researcher that you have to keep in mind, considering your research objectives and your research questions, is what type of questions can be asked. You cannot be very insensible in asking a question. You can't ask them, so how was your feeling when you were detected COVID positive? No. You have to frame your question in such a way that it does not hurt the feelings of your participants. And that also leads to how complex will the questions be. You cannot make a very complicated question, and this is what we do as researchers. When we go, we think, oh, these are the terms, because you have been reading articles, you have been discussing with your supervisor, with your peers, and you think that, okay, these things are very common, people should know about it. For example, you ask them nutrition, nutritional value, coming from the background that you are into. You think that this is a very layman's term, everybody knows what is nutrition. Not necessary. They might not know exact definition of a nutrition. They might just use it as a synonymous to food, something that they eat. So if you ask, what is do you take nutritional food? They might say, of course we do. But how do you kind of measure nutritional value? So you cannot make complex questions. You can ask them that what are the food that you consume for your different meals, and then based on your academic understanding, you can say whether it is nutritional or non-nutritional. But if you ask them, everybody thinks that they are taking nutritional food, you know, irrespective of the level of education. Trust me, some of my colleagues, they so proudly say, and some of our neighbors also, that almost twice or thrice a week they get food delivered from outside. And I think when the COVID-19 struck, they were the worst hit because Zomato and Swiggy stopped delivering food, and they thought they are giving nutritious food. They said, we give vegetables, and what vegetables? The vegetables that are cooked in restaurants. So to them, they're giving nutritional food, but to you as a nutritionist, you don't think that food is nutritious. So you have to design your question in such a way that it does not have a lot of jargons. It does not have a lot of technical terms. It is not a very complex thing for the research participant to understand. Then, will screening questions be needed? You understand what is a screening question? Screening question is when you ask them yes or no. So, for example, you say, is any member of your family affected by COVID-19? They say yes or no. So, if they say no, you have a set of questions. How was their feeling? When was they affected? So, all those questions are useless. Only if somebody is affected, then only those questions will be useful. So when you ask them a yes or no question, it is kind of a screening question, because based on that you decide that whether the next question will be asked. And if we have this type of screening questions, complex questions, the best would be to have a telephone interview, or to have a kind of a you know personal interview. But depending on the qualification of the people, you can also have online interviews or online kind of surveys. But again, many times people fail to understand this type of screening questions. Then also, can question sequence be controlled? When you talk, as I said, that interview is a conversation with purpose. So when we are asking them questions, can we say that we are in a position to control the sequence? That is, we can ask what was the fifth question after the first question, and the second question can be asked at the 10th question. Can we do that? Because when people generally talk, they're in the flow, and just to get the maximum information, you don't want to disturb the flow. But say, for example, if they are talking about their child, that okay, these are the things that they do, and you just say, oh, stop, this, my question is finished, now you tell me the next question. So if you disrupt the flow, then it disrupts the flow of information that we are able to get. Then also, will lengthy questions be asked? You can't ask a very long question. And also, will long response scales be used? Many times, you give them a scale: satisfactory, unsatisfactory, rate it on a scale. So don't give a scale on a point 10. It becomes very difficult for them. The scale could be at least 5 6 to the most. Then, content issues: can the respondents be expected to know about the issue? And will respondent need to consult records? So if you're going and talking to people during the Bengal famine, what was your food basket, or how much of land did you lose? Not expected that they will know everything about it. Or for example, these days the SSR cases, the Sushant Singh Rajput case and the Kangana Ranawat case is kind of grabbing all the media attention. Not necessarily that everybody has to know about it. So if you ask them what is your view about it, so they might need to go consult some newspapers and some media reports to come back to you. So you have to be very specific about the content issue. Then the bias issue, as and there's a feminist scholar. She's a geographer, Jill Valentine, and she says that as a researcher, we do not parachute into the field with empty mind. Whenever we are going to the field, whenever we are collecting certain data, we have certain bias. Okay, but as a researcher, can this social desirability be avoided? The caste, the class bias. Can we say that, oh, these people belong to this caste, so that is how they are going to be? They are the tribal population, so this is how they are going to behave. No, this is our bias. So, can this social desirability or interview or distortion or subversion, as we may call it, can we control it? We cannot have bias go into our questionnaire or into our survey. And also, can false respondents be avoided? Who is a false respondent? The example I gave you: if your questionnaire is meant for the student and the teacher is answering, if your questionnaire is meant for the principal of the school or the college and it is being answered by the PA of the principal, then he or she is a false respondent because your question is not meant for them. So, how can we avoid this? Then, of course, we have to take into consideration administrative issues. For example, cost, facilities, time. As I said, we cannot be very optimistic. We cannot say go around India collecting samples. No, who is going to pay for it? Even if you're getting a fellowship, your contingency is restricted. Okay. Facilities: what are the facilities that you have? If you yourself do not have a proper uninterrupted internet connection or facilities to store digital data, can we go into for a web chat and online service? And time. In academic program, time management is most important. That's what we tell all our students. Don't think you have the entire time to yourself. It is not a lifetime project. It is a very time oriented project, so you have to kind of manage your time very judiciously. You cannot do 3 years of field work in your 5 years of PhD program. No, you have to do coursework, you have to do your field work, also you have to analyze the data. So time management is very important. And of course, personal. Can you afford a research assistant, or do you have to do it yourself? And don't overestimate, none of us are those superhuman beings. We have our own constraints, so don't think that, oh, I can do it. I did my research very lavishly because I had three grants to support my fieldwork. I had my Commonwealth Fellowship, which gave part of my travel money from Canada to Delhi. I had SSHR Shark grant from the Canadian University, which allowed me to kind of take into consideration all the field expenses that I had. And I also had a grant from my department as and Margaret Gillette. So I had actually four grants. So when I was doing my field work in Delhi, I was in a position to appoint four RAs to go and collect data for me. So that allowed me the luxury that I was able to do personal, hire personal, and that kind of added rigor to my research. If I myself had to go and collect the data, perhaps my sample size would have been much smaller, but I could afford the RAs to go collect data, to do the coding and all these things for me. And so all these things have to be taken into account. And last but not the least, ethical issues. Ethics. You have had a class on ethics. I'm not going into detail, but also consent. If you cannot take a written consent, at least verbal consent is minimal. Confidentiality, you cannot use their names. Many times there are data or information that they give which are very sensitive, and that might jeopardize their case. Remember, whenever the research participants are participating in your research, they are actually doing you a favor. And also compensation, which is a token of appreciation or honorarium. So these days, when we are taking a lot of interviews through phone, and my study population does not come from a very well of economic background, so as a token of appreciation or honorarium, we recharge their phone, for that period of interview when they are actually talking to us. So otherwise, they are poor people. You don't expect them to kind of be on a phone paying their own money. Okay, so compensation, token of appreciation. Many times when we talk about children, we give them books or stationaries that they can use. So these are some of the ethical issues that we have to consider. Now, as I said, now talk about interviews. I slightly mentioned about focus group discussion when I was talking about the group administered questionnaire. Now, focus group discussion is also a very familiar form of qualitative method that we kind of consider. And basically, if you know the sociologist Merton, so the journey from Merton, the importance for group opinions, sentiments, it has been increasing, that what people feel. So there's been a lot of marketing research, opinion polls, and their like. Focus group discussion, you have a group of people, and you can't make it a crowd. You have to limit the group of your key participants, and you kind of generate a topic on which you want their opinions, and you note it down. And then for focus group also, not necessarily that it just has to be one of the themes that you go and talk to about, but the sources for focus group discussion could be movies, could be text. You read out, say for example, a report about a certain politician, or about the COVID-19, only the risk take, because that's something all of us can relate to. And you want that this is the article that has been published in today's newspaper. So what is the opinion, how do people feel like it? And you could have a FGD for students, you could have FGD for parents, you could have for teachers, and you see that in three different FGDs, three different types of opinions might come out. For movies, you have a scene from a movie, or you have a clip from a movie, and you ask people about their opinions. So even for FGDs, there could be, different types of sources, data sources. And again, these are secondary data sources. Remember, we had talked about that it need not be just primary data sources. Another important form of qualitative method that we often do is discourse analysis. Now, what is discourse? Discourse is a form of speech or writing or symbolic expression. It could be an advertisement, it could be a poster, it could be a speech, it could be any write up, a book chapter, it could be an article, it could be a newspaper item that reflects organized or ongoing thought. That what is the discourse? The discourse about COVID-19 is that if you do not maintain social distancing, if you do not wear your mask, sanitize your stuff, wash your hands properly, then you have more likelihood to be infected by the virus than others. Now, this concept of discourse analysis, there has been work of Foucault and others who have been very useful in illuminating this structural issue, especially that who kind of operates the discourse, who has the power. In this case, the discourse about COVID-19, it is kind of operationalized by international agencies like WHO and all. You say, oh, this is the WHO guidelines. So who is kind of leading the discourse? And Foucault says that discourse is inseparable for power. We will not go into that, but the point that I want to make is that context is very important here, and just the act of communication. So the no verbal clues and body language is equally, if not more important in the discourse analysis. And when we are doing discourse analysis, of course, a lot of the data that we consider for discourse analysis is secondary in nature. Now, having talked about the research design and all these things that I told you were about data collection. Now, once you have collected the data, we have to code the data and we have to analyze it for meaningful purposes. Now, when we talk about data coding, coding a data in quantitative is much more easier than doing data coding in qualitative. But nonetheless, remember, even in qualitative, we do data coding. And that's what it adds to the scientific nature of qualitative research, that it is just not we are kind of reading something and writing. Qualitative research is not an opinion piece. It is not a popular journalism. It has a scientific rationale behind it, and that's how we follow. So when we talk about data coding, coding is a process in which data is categorized to help us analyze. So we have lot of data, we need to categorize it. It's like arranging your cupboard, arranging your bookshelf, that where you have kept which book. Otherwise you will not be able to find it when you need, and if you don't find it when you need, then those things are useless. The same thing happens with data also. You have plethora of information, lot of data, but they have to be systematically arranged so that the best use can be made. So coding is a process in which data is categorized to help us analyze. And Gibbs says that how you define what the data you are analyzing are about. How do you code them? So coding is just not labeling. It is just not putting a label to it. It is linking of data to the research idea and back to other data. So you know how you are kind of categorizing your information. And based on this, there can be different types of coding. Coding could be concept driven. So you already have broad concepts based on your research question, based on your questionnaire, based on the themes of your focus group discussion, discourse analysis, whatever method you have done, you have derived certain concepts and you have them broadly kind of broadly segregated, and then the data when you read, you kind of try to put it under this concept. It could also be data driven coding, that is, you don't have a preconceived notion of, oh, these are the concepts you are going to talk about. Rather, you let the data speak for itself. So you have the data, you read it, and you see that based on this data or information, these are some of the broad themes that could be available. Now, when we do coding, especially if you have taken an interview, the usual thing is that we transcribe our interview. It is a very tedious job. Most of the students don't like doing it because, generally half hour of interview takes 2 hours of transcription, because transcriptions we do is verbatim. Even you write, if the researcher says or laughs, everything, because we don't want to miss out on anything. So when you are doing coding, you could either do a color coding, that is each of the concept or the coding categories, you could use different colors for them, so that it's easy for you to have a better visual understanding of the different categories. Or you could just use various softwares also. These days we have softwares like NVivo. I use NVivo a lot, but then you have TiAtlas, Nudist, all this data, they also do coding for you. But again, you have to prove what are the coding categories, you have to prove what are the concepts that are kind of there. Okay. And then when you are doing coding, there are certain things that you have to be very careful of. For example, the meaning of the course must be documented in a separate file, because so you think, oh, this is going to be the code for this one, but later on you yourself forget. We also forget. Our don't over trust our memory. Even in computer, if you have worked on a file, you have to search for it. Okay, so when you are doing coding, there are certain things that need to be documented in the file. First, what is the name or the label of the code? Then, who coded it? If you're working on a research project, was the coding done by the principal investigator, by the RA? That matters, because later on, when you change the coding, then you say on this date, this was the code that was formulated by XYZ. But on certain date, after rereading the data, EWF found that this code is not the exact code for this, and the name of the code was changed. It's totally perfect. It's not that once you have decided on a code, you have to stick to it. You can change it. And that's what is the beauty of qualitative research. You can change it as you go on, but you have to mention it. Then also, definition of the code. What exactly is going to be the description of the concept that the code refers to? If you're talking about development, what parameters of development are you talking about? If you're talking about mental health, what aspects of mental health you're talking about? If you're talking about nutrition, what aspects of nutrition are you talking about? So you have to be very specific, and this will help you to analyze your data. So the information about the relationship of the code to other codes you are working with during the analysis, how this code is related to the other codes that have been used. You know, in qualitative research, is not a watertight compartment. They are just not number. So if you're talking about nutrition, is it related to the development of this place? If you're talking about the development of that place, is it related to the health status of the people? How it is related? So all these things have to be minutely documented. Now, having done that, I'll go into the analysis part. Now, the analysis, as I said, the softwares can do it, but you have to be very specific and careful about what you put in the software, because for softwares it says garbage in is garbage out. So it will analyze whatever you give it to, because it cannot make a value judgment or it cannot make quality check. But as a researcher, you have to be very specific about it. Now, there are conventional ways of analyzing the data, which you read the course, come up with concepts. But I'm also going to talk about some of the analysis of which are very much trendy, you can say, these days, and a lot of people are doing it, including me. And it might kind of increase the options that you have in the basket of analysis. So one of such is a visual analysis. Now, when we talk of visual analysis, this is basically researching visual methods or materials. And Rose says that production of empirically grounded responses to particular visual materials. And it is very important for us to justify the interpretation that we give for this type of visual methods, because to do that you will need to have an explicit methodology of how you have done. And I'm going to give you an example from one of my own research that I have conducted sometimes back. And I had analyzed, the advertisements for call center jobs. Call center jobs, and this was done, as I said, sometimes back. And this was based on the advertisement of call center jobs that were published in the Hindustan Times newspaper in a specific time period. And I had analyzed 1375 ads and I'll just show you how I had done it. You could just do the same for you also. When you're talking about the food basket, what are the foods, the way it is being advertised, what are the people that it tries to attract the attention of, and how kind of the visuals and the coloring, and as well as the wordings are kind of centered. So these are some of the examples of the advertisements I'm showing you. And this slide, it shows that how I did the analysis. So this is the analysis of advertisement of call center employment using visual methodologies. And if you look into the first row of the table, you see I have certain codes. I have facial expression, gender, age group, activity type, surroundings, or westerners, wealth indicators, dress style, hairstyle, others, and comments if I have any. So this was the table that I used for all the advertisements that I analyzed it. And these were the things that I noted down from it. Now, based on this master table, as I call it, what I came at, that this advertisements try to create an image of the call center agent, who according to these advertisements are supposed to be urban youth, intelligent, outgoing, fashionable, fun loving, and ready to be a part of the global youth culture. So, this six parameters that I have, it is based on a very rigorous visual methodology that I have done. And as I said, you could do it for movies, you could do it for any other thing depending on your research question. Now, there are other types of qualitative data analysis, and in McGill, when I did a course on qualitative research, and even I was intrigued, and I wasn't kind of familiar with this type of data analysis, because whenever we talk about qualitative data analysis, very boring, right? You have transcripts, narratives, you read and write. No, you could write your data, you could analyze your data in a variety of way, depending on what your strength is. Not necessarily that if you are a researcher you cannot write a poet. You might have a very poetic kind of an inclination, and you could analyze your data and interpret it in form of a poem. You could make a collage if you are very artistic. You could write a story, a script. You could also do phenomenological inquiry. I give you an example. Like in our class, we had a student who was in the Department of Music at McGill, and his entire thesis was in the form of a song. And the song that he wrote was just not that he sat and he wrote whatever what he wanted to. It followed a specific method. He did kind of qualitative research. He coded and analyzed his data, and he interpreted it, analyzed it in form of a song. Now, here are some examples of poetic inquiry. This is again based on research that was done by one of my colleague, and this he called "By My Own Light." The idea of watching myself, and this is just and I think this, the reason I chose this specific kind of poetic extract for today's class, is because these days we are so much used to online teaching, online webinars, and we see ourselves on the video, and that kinds of creates a different kind of identity for us, right? So I think this is a very apt extract for this. So, what he writes, the idea of watching myself on videotape was just pure agony. I keep saying to myself, well, listen, be objective, learn from this. But I was just quimmering. I don't know why. I hated my own voice. I felt I had this sort of awful teacher voice, in the worst sense of the term. We don't like this teacher voice, this lecturing attitude. I was boring. It wasn't perhaps my best day. I think on my better days I can do better, at least by my own light. I've never actually liked looking at photographs of myself. When you look at yourself in the mirror, you see yourself reversed. When you look at a photograph, you see yourself as you are. You never see things in my own light. The last line is not there. And this was based on the analysis of the various video lectures that the teacher had taped, and kind of did an analysis. The second one is that I would like to talk about is kind of the phenomenological approach that we talked about data analysis. So in this, what we do, the first, the data is sorted into broad themes. For example, consumption pattern, lifestyle practices, and then significant statements are found from each of these broad theme. And from this significant statement, we try to formulate meanings, and then in the fourth step we try to cluster up these themes from these meanings, and in the fifth stage then we actually give a write up or analysis of what we have been what we have understood from this rigorous steps that have been followed. Now, another example that I want to give you is of a narrative inquiry. And again, it is based on one of my research of the call centers that I already showed you. And and as I said, you could do multiple methods, not necessarily that only one thesis will have one method. As I told you, in that research, I did a visual methodology, I did a narrative inquiry, I also did phenomenology. Depending, certain parts of your data might be justified by a specific type of method. So you have to, as a researcher, you have to make a call on this. And this, when I was trying to understand the consumption patterns of this call center workers, and it could be kind of generalized to broad youth in today's globalized world, and I found there was a stark gender difference. And I was not able to kind of in a situation that how best could I highlight this gender difference. And I thought perhaps if I could just write a narrative, based on the conversation, then that will allow the reader to understand what is the main point that I'm going to strike at. So I'll just read it out to you. So it was a Monday, the first day of work after the weekend, and the call center agents were in the pickup van going to their night shift. They were catching up with each other. Lalit is male, while Shilpa and Rohini are female. Now, the way I wrote this, because to an Indian audience, it's very much understood that Shilpa and Rohini are female and Lalit is a male. But when you have to kind of address an international audience, it's always better to write this specifically. So Lalit says, "So how was your weekend?" Shilpa, "Good. I did some shopping as usual. Bought a couple of pieces of clothes, a pair of shoes. Then on Saturday night, I went to the disco with my friends. They have opened a new one near PVR. It's so cool. What about you?" Rohini, "Did you go to Shopper Stop? They're having some jewelry exhibition. I wanted to check on it." Or Lalit, "तूने क्या किया?" Lalit, "I had to go to the property dealer again, as he wanted to show me some new apartments in Mayur Vihar, a locality in Delhi." So Rohini says, in a surprised tone, "You're planning to buy an apartment?" Lalit, "Yeah. Since I'm preparing to get married sometime early next year, it's better that I buy a house now." Rohini, "Good yaar. I spend all my money buying clothes and jewelries." And Shilpa says, "Me too. I'm not at all in the habit of saving. You'll be surprised to know how much I have in my bank account. Make a guess." "How much?" Lalit says. 10,000. After thinking for a few seconds and wrinkling his eyebrows, Shilpa says, "Are you crazy? I just have rupees 100." And again she laughs out loudly. Then Rohini said, "Lalit, you just bought a bike last month, isn't it? And now an apartment? Wow, lag raha hai, acha savings ho raha hai." And she said it mockingly. So this kind of brings the male and stereotype in our society, where the male is considered to be the kind of bread earner and take care of the family, while if these women are kind of earning, they can just spend it on themselves. So this helped me to bring out the gender difference in consumption patterns. Now these were some of the examples that I wanted to give you, and I wanted to tell you that there is no restriction on your creativity, especially when it comes to qualitative research, and you can go wild on your imagination, but you have to be very rational. You have to choose it in a very scientific way. And once you do that, the quality of qualitative research is so rich that it can also enable you to theorize some of the things in a way that were perhaps not thought about. Okay, so qualitative research is very important, and we have to do it in a very organized and scientific manner. And once we do that, it is much more interesting than just having the numbers. So that's all I think I have to say it for today. Now I will open it to all of you, and you can just ask me questions, clarifications, your comments, whatever.
Thank you so much, Papia. It was such a lucid and such a interesting kind of a lecture, totally different from what we were going through in these few lectures that we have already had.
Am I
I
audible,
suppose
Purva?
there is, yes, yes, you are audible. You can hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. Papia, thank you so much. Your lecture was such a interesting and very lucid and very different from where we what we were have been listening to all these lectures. So I suppose there is one question in the chat box from
You
one of
you can
my colleagues.
ask me questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. There is one question in the chat box. One of my colleagues has actually asked for a clarification.
Okay. So I will. I think Debumita has a question. She asked, I have a question. Case of children with special needs, the parents are the respondent. Can we use? Of course, you can use mixed method. As I said, there is no kind of restriction that you can use one method or the other. You can use multiple methods. You can use mixed method, a mix of qualitative methods, a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. All these things are actually decided by your question, research question that you have. Okay, so of course you can use.
Follow, do you have any questions?
Any other questions we have?
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am. I have a question. Like when we are using our quantitative methods, we always predetermine the number in our sample size. But for the qualitative methods also, do we predetermine the sample size or can we do it on the basis of our research?
Do we have any other questions, any clarifications?
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
If you have, you can unmute and speak also. It shouldn't be just my voice to be heard. We want to hear you as well.
Actually, Papia, there has been a question. One of our scholars was asking. I suppose there is some network issue. Swati, can you please again repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can you hear me? Ma'am, I'm typing it in the chat box.
Hello, Papia. Hello. Hello.
We don't have any other questions.
Hello, Papia. Hello. Hello, Papia.
Well, Swati asked that should we predetermine the sample size in the qualitative analysis as we like do in the quantitative method? Well, it again depends, on qualitative method, because if you're having a purposive sample, if you're talking, if some of you said that you want to talk about people who are mentally challenged or who are differently able, then it might be very difficult for you to predetermine in advance that how many people fall in that category. Okay, so you can say that it should not be less than 50, 40, but in that cases it becomes very difficult for us to predetermine the sample size, because the sampling method that we are using, if you're using, say for example, snowball sampling, so you start with say 5 key nodes, go to 25, or the snowball might end just at 25 itself. It might not go further, but you might have thought about 150 sample size. Okay, for example, I told about purposive sampling also, about that you have a purpose, so you are kind of determining the people that fall into your study criteria in your as who are eligible to be your research participants. And if you know that in advance, that is well and good, but in most of the cases it is very difficult for us to know, because especially when we are talking about people who are mentally challenged, or people who are differently able, not many people to come out with this type of statistics. So if you think that, okay, I'm going to talk about talk to 50 people, but you are able to get only 25 respondents, then you cannot say that you have done a bad job. It depends on the availability also. So we can have a kind of an idea that this many people we might survey, but we cannot be very predetermined or fixated with the sampling size. Does that clarify, Swati? Okay. Okay. Any other clarifications or questions?
Any other questions? Papia, and am I audible? Hello?
And you're audible to us, but Papia ma'am বোধহয় শুনতে পাচ্ছে না।
Scholars, I think there is some kind of a problem where madam can't hear us, but we can listen to each other, I think.
No, I'm not speaking. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Now you are audible, ma'am.
Am I audible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me, Purva?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you, Papia.
I can see you, Purva.
Yeah, I can hear you as well as I can see you. I can see you as well as I can hear you.
Let me leave the meeting once and join.
Yeah, that will be better, I suppose.
Okay, okay. Can you hear me, Purva?
Yes, I can hear you.
Now I can also hear you. Now I can hear you.
So, Papia, thank you. Such a wonderful lecture. Especially, you have related so well with all the aspects of the social life and real life examples, your own examples. It was actually intriguing. we are actually more than we are very happy. I was expected that you are such a good speaker, you will speak nice, but you have actually been this is something more than what I had expected. I'm so happy, and our students are actually being benefited so much for this lecture. Thank you so much, Papia, for giving us time. From the behalf of the Department of Home Science, University of Calcutta, we are actually immensely grateful to you for delivering this beautiful lecture. And I hope even if some of the students, if they need some of your guidance, you will be there. For them, and we wish you all the best for all your future academic endeavors.
Thank you so much, Purva, for giving this opportunity and for your, lovely words of appreciation. And it was really nice to interact with the students. And thank you all for, dealing with all the technical glitches that we had. And perhaps there'll be opportunities, perhaps when we can, have an in-person interaction also. But I really appreciate this opportunity, and I thank you again for inviting me and having faith in me to come and talk to the students. And I wish all the students a very bright, research career. And of course, I'll be happy to help if at any point you feel that there are certain things that you need clarifications on this. I tried to kind of relate it to some of your research, but I'm not sure how well that was done, but I think it was a great opportunity for me as well. So thank you, everybody. Okay, thank you. Then I'll take your leave, Purva. Okay, okay, okay. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
তো আমাদের নেক্সট সেশনটা 2:30 থেকে, আর আজকে তো এসপিএসএস, সুতরাং তোমরা নিজেদের ল্যাপটপে ওইটা মানে রেডি রেখো আর কি, হ্যান্ডস অন ট্রেনিং হবে। তো আমরা শিখবো তাহলে এসপিএসএস এ ডেটা অ্যানালিসিস। তো we will again meet at 2:30. So bye for now.
Okay,
Okay,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.